Claude.
You know, a lot of people were fine with what I did. Why are you in my car?
Requires me to spend a lot of time with the body to make sure it's never discovered. Teeth are a fucking problem.
A stunning woman finds herself falling for a guy who seems totally ordinary at first glance.
Different points of view, and there are no absolutes.
By day, he's just a regular college professor, but behind the scenes, he's got a way more interesting gig.
Doesn't it?
Playing the role of a fake hitman. The guy, Gary, isn't just some amateur. He's a master of disguise. That's how he landed a side job with the New Orleans Police Department, going undercover to catch people trying to hire assassins.
Things electronic and digital, and found
Gary wasn't born to play a killer. He started out in a much less exciting role. Just another agent working surveillance, listening in on conversations. But when the original fake hitman quit unexpectedly, Gary had to step in.
Fuck him. Fuck him.
That one decision changed everything. Turns out, he had a natural talent for slipping into different identities.
Am I the right guy to eliminate your prompt?
The moment he met with potential clients, his usual awkwardness disappeared, replaced by the chilling confidence of a real contract killer. He could talk about different ways to eliminate targets without hesitation.
Never. Fuck.
Even sending shivers down his colleagues' spines. Moral of the story? Never mess with a psychology professor. Someone who studies deviant behavior might not be too far from it themselves.
I work a 7-7.
For decades, books, TV shows, and movies have painted hitmen as these mysterious figures you can hire to solve your biggest problems.
because hitmen have been a staple of books.
It's all fiction, of course, but Gary thrives in this world of make-believe. With every new case, he hones his craft, picking up new accents, experimenting with makeup,
I found tailoring the hitman to the individual
and tailoring his persona to match each client's expectations. A wannabe rapper? He plays the streetwise assassin with a beanie and a hip-hop swagger. A wealthy older woman looking to get rid of her husband? He becomes the gruff, blue-collar type.
There are no cameras.
Lady, this is...
A kid who's watched too many gangster films? He puts on a leather jacket, sports fake tattoos, and leans into the Hollywood-style hitman look. The truth is, by the time someone comes looking for a killer, they've already stepped beyond the point of no return.
Then I can sue his doctors for malpractice.
All Gary has to do is guide them a little further and turn them into solid evidence in court. What's ironic is that Gary even brings his undercover experiences into his classroom. He asks his students, can people really change, or is everything just an act?
a question, because I think it's going to be a lot of...
He knows better than anyone how easily people slip into different roles. But his job has its dark sides. Every day, he sees how love can curdle into hate.
For you over in traffic patrol.
How murder can feel like the only solution. Just when he's starting to lose faith in humanity, he meets someone who makes him question everything. Madison. Madison's life hasn't been easy. Her parents split when she was a kid, and she's been living with her mom ever since. She's worked all sorts of jobs, hairdresser, flight attendant. But after getting married, she became a full-time housewife. Her husband, Kurt, is a rich guy from a family-run oil and gas business.
Nothing.
On paper, he looks clean, but there have been whispers about domestic abuse. When Madison finally reaches out to hire a hitman, Gary has no idea what kind of assassin she's expecting to meet.
He doesn't let me work.
The night they finally come face-to-face in a restaurant, Gary steps into the role of Ron, a suave and mysterious contract killer.
Comes up.
Whoa.
Madison's request is clear. She wants her husband gone. Kurt is controlling, refuses to let her work, and even dictates what she eats. Over dinner, their conversation flows naturally, almost like a date. For the first time, Gary finds himself distracted from his mission.
Lost a child to a...
Madison isn't like his usual clients. She isn't driven by greed or malice. She's just scared and desperate. Instead of pushing her to incriminate herself,
There's a lot.
Gary does something he's never done before. He advises her to walk away, to escape before she makes an irreversible mistake. His colleagues are baffled. Gary, the same guy who never strays from a mission,
Let her off before she could start incriminating herself.
suddenly breaks character. They joke about how a guy is stiff and serious, as Gary could pull off playing such a charismatic hitman. But maybe that's the point. Maybe those personas aren't entirely fake. Maybe they're all just different pieces of him. Before his boss can call him out for going off script, Another problem surfaces. A defense lawyer tries to take legal action against Gary, calling his undercover work unethical.
Empathy, a human.
According to the lawyer, he's tricking desperate people into committing crimes instead of helping them. But the case has no legs. Anyone who approached Gary had already decided to hire a hitman.
Is the most dishonest.
If they hadn't met him, they would have found someone real. Even though the accusations sting, Gary doesn't quit. Then, something unexpected happens. Madison reaches out again, not to talk about murder, but just to talk. Gary knows he should maintain professional boundaries, but he can't help himself. He meets up with her, stepping back into his Ron persona, and accepts her invitation to a dog support group. He's not even a dog person, but love has a funny way of making people do things they normally wouldn't. From their casual chats, Gary realizes Madison is finally taking control of her life.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's left Kurt, moved to Santa Rock, and is in the middle of divorce proceedings. She's even indulging in the little freedoms Kurt once forbade her from enjoying. The more time they spend together, the more she starts to suspect that Ron isn't who he says he is. How could a hitman be so kind, so gentle? What she doesn't realize is that she's not just falling for Ron. She's falling for Gary too. And Gary, despite himself, is falling right back. The lines between reality and roleplay blur. Madison forgets Ron is a hitman, and Gary forgets he's supposed to be an undercover cop.
Not just randomly.
They agree not to ask too many personal questions, to just enjoy whatever this is for as long as they can. But deep down, Gary is caught in a psychological tug-of-war. His instincts push him toward Madison, but his morals tell him to walk away. His logical side tries to strike a balance, like a lawyer negotiating between criminals and the law. It's the classic battle between impulse and reason.
Princess, we can never go to my place.
Good, I don't.
While juggling his feelings for Madison, Gary remains sharp in his work. His performances as a hitman are so convincing. It's almost like he's found his true calling. In high school, he was too shy to even step on a stage, but now he's the star of his own twisted show. Every criminal he catches is like an audience member standing up to applaud. Of course, he also has to deal with sharp-minded lawyers who challenge his methods.
First class all the way.
If you weren't coercing them, why the disguises? Why the accents? They argue. But Gary always has the perfect response. He's not tricking people into committing crimes. He's simply becoming the hitman they already imagined. For a while, Gary manages to keep up this double life. But there's one problem he can't ignore. Madison's situation is still unresolved. One night, after a long evening together, they share a passionate kiss outside a bar. It's supposed to be their secret, but just as they're lost in the moment, fate steps in. Standing there, watching them, is none other than Kurt. And just like that, everything unravels. Gary wasn't looking for trouble, so he quickly led Madison away. But Kurt wasn't about to let them go that easily. He stayed hot on their heels, refusing to back off. He even went so far as to try grabbing Madison, which was when Gary had enough. Without hesitation, he pulled out his gun. He was a pro, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Madison, on the other hand, was enjoying every second of watching Kurt squirm. Despite the momentary relief, Gary had a bad feeling creeping up on him. Later, at a fast food joint, they unexpectedly ran into Luther, the guy who had once pretended to be an undercover agent. The moment Luther laid eyes on Gary, he recognized him. Thankfully, he just came over for some casual chit-chat and didn't expose Gary's real identity. Gary exhaled in relief, but the next day, things took a wild turn. Turns out, Kurt had unknowingly contacted Gary for a hit job. Since all their negotiations were done without face-to-face meetings, Kurt had no idea who he was actually talking to. And the job? Taking out his own wife, Madison, and her supposed lover. But what made it even more twisted was Kurt's final request. He wanted Madison to hear his last words before dying. "This is from your loving husband." Gary saw red. Furious, he yelled for Kurt to turn around. The moment Kurt recognized him, he bolted without a second thought. The cops monitoring nearby were baffled. Why would this guy run like that out of nowhere? Gary didn't bother explaining much and immediately called Madison, warning her to stay away from home for now. Then there was Luther. That guy had never been a serious undercover agent. He always had one foot in and one foot out. When he found out Gary had been meeting Madison in secret, he didn't think much of it. Gary played it cool, lying that it was all just a coincidence. That night, Madison, wanted to show her gratitude for all Gary's help, invited him over. Once he got Luther off his back, he rushed to Madison's place to tell her the truth. Kurt had put a hit out on her. But Madison wasn't fazed at all. She knew Gary wouldn't harm her, and she was sure Kurt wouldn't dare make a move himself. That put Gary at ease for the time being. He went back to his usual undercover teaching work, balancing his double life. Everything seemed to be under control, until things went completely sideways. Kurt was dead. His body was found dumped in an alley near a local restaurant. A single .38 caliber shot straight to his heart. It was a clean job, the kind only professionals pull off. When the cops dug into it, they discovered that Kurt had been in a heated argument with Madison's so-called lover right outside a bar. The guy had even pulled a gun on him, making him the prime suspect. Luther, who had a knack for sniffing out trouble, quickly pieced things together. He suggested teaming up with Gary to track down this mystery lover. Then, in a classic Luther move, he casually dropped, "I know you're the one Madison's been seeing." Gary wasn't about to confirm anything, especially since Luther had no proof. Later that day, Gary met up with Madison to ask if she had any involvement in Kurt's death. Madison broke down, crying her eyes out and looking genuinely terrified. For a moment, Gary let his guard down, reassuring her there was nothing to fear. That's when she dropped the bombshell. "I killed him." Gary had completely overlooked something crucial. Madison wasn't some innocent bystander. She had been in a relationship with a hitman, after all. On top of that, she had unknowingly learned a thing or two from him. Everything he had ever taught her, how to avoid messy crime scenes, how to ensure a clean kill, had all sunk in. Realizing how deep they were in, Gary had no choice but to come clean about his own identity. Madison was stunned, but before they could fully process what this meant for them, Gary got a call from the station. It turned out Madison had become the main suspect. 6 months ago, Kurt had increased his life insurance by a whopping $1 million, naming Madison as the only beneficiary. Since they weren't officially divorced yet, the cops were convinced she had a strong motive. Meanwhile, Luther was itching to spill the beans about Gary, but before he could, Gary flipped the script on him. He casually mentioned that Madison had invited him to dinner at the fast food joint as a thank you. And oh, what a coincidence! Luther had been there too, and even chatted with her. Suddenly, the police's attention shifted to Luther. Of course, Luther quickly cleared his own name. Then, he came up with a plan. Gary, still posing as hitman Ron, should get Madison to open up about the murder. If she really did it, she'd have no reason to lie to a hitman, right? The cops loved the idea and sent Gary in, fully wired for sound. But Gary had other plans. He discreetly typed out a message to Madison. "The cops are listening. Play along. We're on the same team." And just like that, the two put on an Oscar-worthy performance. Madison convincingly denied any involvement, smoothly shifting the suspicion away from herself. The cops had no choice but to back off. Only Luther wasn't buying it. That night, when Gary went to see Madison, he found Luther already waiting inside her apartment. He had figured everything out, but instead of exposing them, he wanted a piece of the action. He demanded a cut of Kurt's life insurance money. But before he could make any real threats, he suddenly slumped over. Madison had spiked his drink. Realizing they had no other choice, they went all in. Gary pulled out a plastic bag, suffocating Luther with clinical precision. He then staged the scene to look like a tragic overdose. No signs of struggle, no loose ends. Given Luther's miserable track record, no one would question the suicide. At that moment, Gary finally found the perfect balance between his two identities, psychology professor by day, ruthless killer when needed. The lessons he had drilled into his students now had real-world answers. In the end, he and Madison got married, had kids, and somehow built a normal life together. Of course, there were awkward moments. "Mom, how did you and Dad meet?" The movie ends. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you didn't, feel free to hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure. For the full experience, you should definitely watch the movie yourself. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.